Hello and welcome to How to Beat Depression. Today I want to be talking about stress because stress is one of the biggest triggers for me, and it is the thing that can tumble me down into the world of depression quicker than anything else. We live in such a fast moving society today, and I think it's safe to admit that I'm kind of addicted to that kind of speed and the adrenaline that comes with, going here, going there, doing all these different things. But this kind of pace where you don't really have a chance to kind of take on board what's going on, and putting a lot of pressure on yourself, like this sort of almost like self-inflicted stress, is something I do all the time, and it's just really destructive. I set myself really unrealistic goals and timelines a lot of the time, which are a huge problem. Again, it's almost like a real world version of the word should. This is the amount of time I've got to do this thing. I've decided it's a completely arbitrary amount of time, but that's what I've decided, and then I get angry and cross when I don't manage to do things within that time period. And no one ever does. No one ever does anything within a set time period. That doesn't happen. I mean, occasionally it does, but generally speaking, life gets in the way. People come home early, or someone interrupts you. You get a phone call, so like your mum wants it. Like, life will always get in the way. Life is always a distraction, and there's never going to be a point where that isn't the case. So you need to just kind of accept it and be more flexible with how things are gonna play out. Stress is linked to so many unbelievably bad things. I mean, it's the equivalent effectively of smoking, I think, in terms of how damaging it is to your health. And I know it's fun to kind of ride that wave of adrenaline or whatever, but you are making yourself sick. And if you have depression, it can really trigger you to go down a path that's difficult to get back from. So with doing presenting, I had like a very specific idea of what my job I thought would be like. I thought that it would be very leisurely. There'd be lots of taxis and people sending scripts to me, and I'd leisurely sit there and read them and learn my lines, and then turn up for work and have my hair done, and then I'd wander onto set and, okay, it's totally not like that in any way. And I spent the first part of doing this job being kind of really annoyed and stressed that it wasn't like that. I mean, I'd based that theory on nothing. It's just what I thought it would be like. There was no facts involved. And the job itself is really stressful. Some of the things that happen, right? You'll get booked for jobs like really last minute. You'll be given the script the day before. You'll be told to learn something. Then on the day when you're on the set with loads of people around, they'll ask you to have just magically learned a completely different part of the script that they didn't tell you to learn. They'll tell you there's an auto cue. There's not an auto cue. You haven't learned the thing. It's just non-stop being thrown into situations where you basically look really unprofessional, even though it's somebody else's fault. It can be incredibly stressful, I think, is sort of the point. So yeah, my job is pretty stressful. There's some quite unreasonable things that happen, but what I realized was it's just kind of par for the course of the job. It always seems to be incredibly last minute and incredibly stressful. And it used to kind of deeply upset me and really freak me out and take me to kind of quite negative places. Why couldn't I just, do these things that they needed me to do? And you have to really start to be aware of what is stressing you out in your life. And I had to come to a point where I was like, well, this is the job. It's just stressful. That's it. I need to make a decision as to whether I'm going to have to find a way of dealing with this. Is there a way I can combat this? Or am I just going to have to stop doing what I want to do? And what I've realised is just I can manage it, because number one, I accept that it's going to be stressful. So therefore almost it isn't stressful because I expect the unexpected. I know I'm going to get things last minute. I know if things are just going to be sort of thrown at me in weird ways. Okay, that's part of the job. I need to accept that. What can I do to combat that? Well, I can make sure I am as prepared as I can be. I learn the scripts as best I can. I don't assume anything. If they say there's going to be an auto cue, sometimes, depending, I mean, if it's the BBC, there'll be an auto cue. But if it's like a smaller scale production, I'll maybe learn that script a little bit more. You know, it's sort of planning for failure, planning for stress, understanding that these things are possibly likely to happen and to have a strategy in place for when they do, because you know they're going to at some point. The other thing for me as well was, you know, if I'm going to get all this stuff kind of thrown at me last minute, I used to freak out a lot about learning lines, and I used to think I had a terrible memory. But in my spare time, I would learn scripts. I would sit in my room and practice learning scripts, and, you know, doing just random links about, like, give me 5 keywords, where am I, what am I doing, and and then I'd make them into like pieces to camera and stuff like that. I would practice my job so that when I was asked to do it on the spot, it wouldn't be the first time I've done it. And it's that same thing of, once you've done something once and you have the confidence to know that you've done it before, which means that you can do it again, and that really does help alleviate a lot of this like stress and the fear and the nervousness that you can get sometimes with work. And that's, you know, you can apply these theories to any kind of job. You know, if there's something going to ask you to do a presentation, or they're going to ask you to do something that you feel like you're not really prepared for, prepare for it. Practice it at home, whatever that might be, just so when it happens, and let's be honest, it's going to happen at some point, you're kind of halfway there, you're sort of ready, you know in your head that you can do it, and you can tell yourself that you can do it because you've done it before. Again, there's, you know, that small kind of caveat about what you say to yourself. Positive mental attitude makes a huge difference. One of the other things I was terrified of doing was stand-up comedy. I went through a bit of a phase where I went and did all these things that terrified me. And I told you the bungee jump story before. I never thought anything could ever counteract the physical reaction to throwing yourself off a building. You know, the fear that that would induce. How could anything be worse than that? Apparently for me, stand-up comedy was loads and loads worse. I don't know why, it just absolutely terrified me. I did a course, because I was like, right, I'm gonna do this because I'm afraid of it. I did a course, and I learned, you know, with these people, and at the end of the course you like do a show. And all you had to do is prepare 5 minutes. And I'd started presenting at this point, but this was kind of different. It's like presenting, you're just kind of standing there saying stuff that's undermining the skill involved, but comedy, it's like it's right or wrong. You know, you're funny or you're not, and if you're not, then you're wrong. It's like a sort of maths problem. You don't get marks for the workings though, or whatever. And I remember being on in the second half, and I was waiting and I was waiting, and the whole day I was petrified. And I mean like stomach churningly thinking about it, thinking I'm gonna be sick, petrified. I just stood in front of the mirror and I practiced my 5 minutes, and I practiced my 5 minutes, and I must have practiced it hundreds of times. I'm not kidding, I was doing it all day, because I was like, what if I get up there and forget it? What if I forget? Go up there and forget it? What if? Oh my God. And I did it and I did it and I did it. I did it almost to the point where I didn't have to think about the words. And I'd never learned anything like that for work in that sort of way. Anyway. So come the show, I'm waiting around. I'm hiding behind a desk in the back of the room, like bent over, like, and everyone's coming up to me going like, hey Julia, are you all right? And I'm just like, and they're like, cool, talk to you later. Like, I clearly had some serious issues, and everyone's like, what's gonna happen when she gets on stage? I mean, I was like bent double, hyperventilating, terrified. So the second act comes, and my friend Ant's there, and he's like, you're going on in a minute? I was like, yeah. And I just stood there, and I was so nervous, I was so terrified and so stressed by the whole thing. And all I did was I just said to myself over and over again, I was like, you know it. 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 Like, you know it. You've done it 400 times today. You know it. Like, this is ridiculous. You know, you're not going to forget it. And in the end, it was like I couldn't even rationalize anything in my head because I was so terrified. It was just all so scatty, and I was physical and everything. So I just said, you know it, over and over and over and over and over again and over again and over again. And I just kept saying, I was like, you know it, you know it, you know it. To the point where I couldn't let nothing else get in my head. Yeah. Anyway, I went up on stage, I did my 5 minutes. Probably was a little bit pacey, but it was good. People laughed. I came back off stage having been terrified, and my friend Ant was still standing there, and I do not recollect one moment of that performance. Not one. I don't remember any of it. I completely blanked the whole thing out. That's how terrified I was. And I got off stage and I was like, oh God, what just happened? And Ant was like, oh, well, you just did your stand-up. And I was like, he was like, it was good, it was good. I was like, okay. It was the most terrifying and stressful thing I think I've done. Well, there are other things since then, but knowing what you can do to make it better. Admittedly, this isn't the best example because I was still pretty terrified, but I was doing something that was like my worst fear in the whole world. So just to contextualize, you know, for me, that was a huge achievement. But knowing that I was going to get that scared, and preparing until the point where there was no choice for me to just say these words in this exact order because there was nothing else I could do with them. And it's about knowing what's going to stress you out, and what can you do to make it better, to make it easier for yourself. Or if you can't do any of those things and it's just something within your life that just upsets you and stresses you out, this can sometimes be the case with friendships. I've had this in the past. And sometimes you just need to remove yourself from that situation, you know, because especially with things like friendships or family members is tougher because it's family and you can't really get rid of them in quite the same way. But certainly with friendships or people around you who cause you those kind of problems, you can choose to take that step back. You know, if you feel like those relationships are just really not pleasant in any way and are making you feel terrible and stressed, just take yourself away from them. You know, life is too short to be surrounded by people who upset you. I mean, if it's someone who's very, very dear to you, you can have that conversation and explain how they make you feel. Chances are, if it's quite a long-standing relationship, the dynamic might not change, and just sort of be prepared for that. I think in essence, just being prepared is the key to combating stress for me, and just being aware that things aren't always going to go to plan, and there's only so much you can really do to change. You know, you need to be able to let go of a lot of stuff. It's really important that you become aware of what parts or what ways your life works that causes you stress. What is it about how you run your life? And what are those kind of like bottleneck stress points? So obviously you need to become aware of when you are becoming stressed, and make a mental note of what things have kind of caused you to get to this point. There are certain points of my job that can still cause stress. Like a recent example was I was doing I decided to do a whole playthrough of a video game for YouTube because I want to do more gaming and I love doing my games, and why don't I play a whole game all the way through? And what I realized is because my life is, my job is, it's like really sporadic, it's like really busy, and then I might be traveling and I'm doing other things, and like there's no real structure to it. So I found it incredibly difficult to do this entire playthrough, to the point where it became a chore, and I got really, really stressed. And I mean like crazed, really stressed very quickly because I wasn't meeting these deadlines that I'd put in my head for uploading these videos. I love doing stuff on YouTube. I genuinely really enjoy the experience, but with that and kind of juggling the rest of my life, it can sometimes feel a bit like a bag of rocks that I've just attached to myself for no reason. And I never really wanted it to feel like that. I wanted to enjoy what I was doing. And doing these kind of full playthroughs is just, it's just not manageable with my life the way that it is. I can't commit that kind of time to it. So I had to have a kind of sit and a think down about how I was going to do it, which is why I kind of chose to do vlogs. I do a lot of vlogs when I'm kind of like out and about, because I can shoot while I'm working and I get to go to lots of different places, and that interests me, and it means that the edits are always interesting and it's not kind of the same thing over and over again, and I prefer that. And I guess it's just an extension of what I do for a job, which is presenting, so it feels like a nice kind of synergy. So for me, it was kind of looking at what things I could do in my life that are going to cause the least amount of stress, but also mean that I get to express myself or fulfill something, you know, from what I want to do from, you know, like my work side, that isn't just going to cause me problems later on. Because at the end of the day, my mental health is my top priority. And if doing vlogs made me a little bit crazy and manic and upset me, I wouldn't do them, because my mental well-being is my main priority. I mean, it's taken me years to get to this point where if anything feels destructive or undermines sort of my positivity or anything like that that can start making me feel low, then I just try and cut it out of my life, because it's just not worth it. You know, life can be a real struggle, and I want to make it easy as possible. Some things I'll suck up and I'll put up with because I'm very, very passionate about it, and it might cause me stress, but I'm passionate about it and that's what I want to do, and it's an acceptable loss, and I try and manage other things in a different way to kind of even it out. But you need to look at your life and see what things are causing you stress. And if there's no way of resolving it or doing it differently so that it doesn't feel like that and you doesn't have that reaction, then maybe you need to really readdress what you're doing. Because like I said, your mental health is your #1 priority. It should take precedence over everything else, right? If there are people who are toxic around you, there's situations that are stressful, whatever it is, especially if you're feeling low, especially if you're feeling vulnerable, you need to just cut yourself out of these conversations or these interactions or these environments that are going to make you feel bad. Stress is so damaging to you, and it can really spiral you out of control so fast. You just need to become aware of what those situations are, like sense how you're feeling inside. I mean, always, anyway, generally, if you start to feel depressed, try and think back to what happened just before, if there was something that triggered it. Because if you can spot what it is, whatever that is, then you can, you know, you can react to it and you can do something to try to stop it happening from next time. So your homework for this week is, I want you to look and have a think and a sit down, get a pen, get a pad, think about the last few times you've been really, really stressed. What were the situations? What was it about those situations that made you feel really, really stressed? And off the back of that, you can start to think about ways that you can then change your behavior or change the situation or change something about it so that you can alleviate the stress from your life. And of course, once you reduce that, you're going to feel so much better.